Welcome to the STABCast, a podcast dedicated to Star Wars Legion.
The Force is strong in my family.
Welcome, cadets and commanders, to the STABcast, the Sunsphere Tactical Attack Brigade's Legion podcast. I am your Royal Canadian Dewback Police Officer, Will Heim, with your Tuscan Gaffy Stick Maker, Ryan Slowoski, and your Moisture Farmer Co-op Manager, Ben Fowler. How are we doing tonight, gentlemen?
Doing fine.
I can't complain. I get to play a lot of Legion this weekend, so I'm excited.
This week on STABcast, battle reports from our Fun at the Tables, a continued look at Turn 0 and starting the game, listeners' questions, and more.
So, guys, it's been about a week and a half since we recorded our last episode. What Legion have we been playing? Ben, what have you been playing?
Most of it's been casual games. I've been watching a lot more Tabletop Simulator. The more and more I watch, the more and more I'm impressed with the mods and the people who designed that. Showed up at Casual Night the other day. We had, 14 people there. We're setting up tables left and right. I helped 2 brand new players get their first games in, got the board set up for them, walked them through the opening rounds, stood next to them when they started playing, and then another player showed. He and I did a 500-point battle because that's what he had with him. Beautiful red Martian table. It was nice. I think I posted some photos on the Instagram. Check those out. So it's been a fun, casual week of trying this and that. Will, what about you?
Yeah, I've been playing a bunch of casual games. It's been great. Played Richard and Brett recently. Both were really close. Richard, it came down to the tiebreaker, but Brett's game I did lose based off a rally die. It was so close. But yeah, I've just been having a lot of fun. Although I will say, I think my opponents have colluded because I've played 4 or 5 800-point games and they've all been breakthrough. I don't know what's happening.
Everybody loves breakthrough. So I've been getting to probably watch more Legion than I've actually gotten to play. Probably since in the past week, I've only gotten to play one game against friend of the show, Tim. But I've actually been getting to do some casting for the Invader League on Tabletop Simulator. I think I got to cast 3 games this weekend, so I was pretty busy with that. If you want to come check out our Twitch stream, it's at STABcast. We're still working the kinks out. I'm learning how to stream. It's been challenging, but it's been fun, and that Invader League is definitely heating up. But out of the coolest thing that I've gotten to see while playing games is we're getting to the point to where our local play group is really starting to figure out this game and really starting to figure out where it branches off from other miniatures war games. And watching all these players have these like aha and eureka moments as they figure out how this game is different, how to win this game, and how to really use the tools the game gives you to its fullest advantage has been a whole lot of fun.
When you see them move a unit in a different way because they realize, oh, the objective's over there, or if I do this, forces my opponent to want to move this guy next.
Right.
Playing with their opponent that way, that's when I realize, okay, they've got this. I don't need to stand around anymore.
Right, exactly.
So going back to our start of the game, talk about creating our battlefield. Last episode, we talked about initiative. And with the release of FFG's new tournament organizer rules, that definitely has changed the way we're going to talk about how we set up our battle deck. So pay attention to this segment. It's going to be a good one. Will, what deployment are we talking about tonight?
This week we're going over Major Offensive. I've seen a lot of players struggle with measuring out, but once you get it under control, it's pretty easy to understand. Yeah, this one's interesting. I think it's the largest by area. It's either that or the Long March. I'm not sure. It definitely makes Breakthrough a lot more interesting because instead of just marching forward, you have to march into that L shape. And trust me on this, I'm the Breakthrough expert.
I was thinking when I see Breakthrough done on Major Offensive, it's like everyone either goes clockwise or counterclockwise, and occasionally you get some guy who wanders across the middle of the field and tries to shoot at something.
They usually die.
I like the placement of in the elbow of the deployment zone for Major Offensive for an ATST. You get great coverage. It pushes it way out there, so you're often in range 4 at the start because you're where your opponent has to be. Range 4 or beyond, so you get to do an early mortar if you want to, just if you have nothing else to do with your ATST. I really like it for that. Gives you a nice commanding view of the map as well. You angle it right, you see most of the map for most of the game until they get up close and personal. I also like the fact that it allows you to springboard into some objectives. Depending on the objective card, you can be right next to it because Major Offensive is so far out.
Yeah, the thing that I really like about this deployment, and it all obviously comes down to the board you're playing on, but it can turn into a 2 or a 3 front, really scrappy skirmish game. You know, Ben was kind of talking about how you can get your ATST right up into it really quickly where it wants to be. But kind of conversely, you can force these 2 or 3, depending on your objectives in the setup, really small 2 and 3 activation fights, which really lends itself to the way that I like to approach the game. It feels, for even it being this big deployment zone, it turns into a really, really scrappy game really quickly. And I really like the chaos that it brings. And I also have been having a lot of fun with Double Commander. And I think it lends itself really well to a Double Commander list, being able to put one of your commanders in each of the L's and kind of have their leadership bubbles overlap in the middle to cover most of the area where you're going to be taking suppression tokens. So with regards to that, we're also going to be talking about this week intercept transmissions, a objective that, on speaking of the devil, major offensive can be really, really screwy. Will, have you gotten to play intercept transmissions, and what are your thoughts on it?
I've not gotten to play intercept transmissions. Scoring only on the even rounds makes it very interesting. I think trying to get them on turn 2 could really help your score boost in later rounds. So I would approach those early rounds similar to Breakthrough, where you have to keep moving and get up to those points early. But you do have to worry about overexposing yourself at that point to where your opponent could come in, wipe you off, and then score the points the other 2 times they open up to be scored.
I think this objective, for those players that want to play a deathmatch style game, with the objectives we have right now, I think intercept transmissions is the closest we get. It can get really bloody, especially going into that final score, because ultimately, a lot of times, unless you're running force push or some other way to move models, the only way to really get troopers off of points, since you just have to be within range 1, is just to eliminate them. So I think this can become a very aggressive, a very bloody game. But the thing that I find most interesting about it is kind of like Will touched on, that last score keeps the game spicy. It keeps it interesting since it scores double points. Even if you start to fall behind, it keeps the game tense until the final score. It's super interesting. I've had a lot of fun, probably the most fun, playing intercept transmissions.
Yeah, fighting over that range 1 band circle, it does mean I'm just going to have to murder who's ever on the other side of that. Get out of my circle. Get out of my circle. I was watching a tabletop simulator game on Sunday, and the terrain and object placement forced some really strange engagements. Some ATSTs had to fire over some rocks in order to see around the edges, and it allowed a much heavier cover piece. One of the transmission objectives was on top of a building, so you could stand on one side of the wall and not see your opponent on the other side, but both of you were competing for that circle. And so it came down to a matter of, can I march more of my guys into that without having to shoot the other guy? It allowed a very nice point swing, like Ryan said. At the very end of that match, points didn't go where I thought they were going to. Our condition tonight is rapid reinforcements. And of course, it's a condition that allows you, if you want, to take 2 of your units and hold them off to redeploy later towards the end of round 2 if they come out of your bag that way. And at first, I thought it mandated that you had to do it. But, going back to actually read the card, as you should do in every game, I realized it was optional, which lowered my zeal for it just a little bit. But I like the fact that it can force your opponent to react in a different way. Like our Sun Tzu segment last week, if your opponent's reacting, then they're not being proactive. They're not actively trying to do something. And a nice pincer attack can show up. You deploy them outside of range 2 of an enemy unit, so that could be nice placement for objective grabbing, or going on the other side of the map where you want it to be anyway without the risk of losing the unit.
Yeah, and I think one thing it really benefits would be units with really short ranges. I think fleet troopers would kind of like appearing behind the enemy.
Yep, absolutely.
You take the move and you're within range for all your piles of dice. As well as flame troopers could get into a good situation there as well. Now, using this on Breakthrough, also allows you to perhaps appear in the opponent's deployment zone, to where instead of having to go through their forces, you're now behind them, and they have to choose whether to proceed into your zone and face whatever you've got there, or turn around to try to clear you out on turn 3.
So and thus tying them up to not get into range to score.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it can create some interesting scenarios.
Yeah, for me, I don't even see the words rapid reinforcements on a card. I see the words clear conditions with an asterisk at the end of it. I am not sold on rapid reinforcements at all. I like to play a high activation style, And having those activations off the board for 2 of my 6 turns is, I can see the value depending on the deployments, depending on the terrain, depending on the objective. You know, if there's a really hard to reach objective point and you're playing key positions and you think you may be able to just paradrop onto it, I could see maybe using one guy or holding one guy in reserve. But really, when I'm a guy who really wants to leverage activation count, I don't know that rapid reinforcements helps me. Now, I think rapid reinforcements, unlike a lot of our battle cards, really helps the red player, because the red player gets to see how many units the blue player wants to load up and then can respond to that. But that's, I think, overall a super minor advantage. I think it's clear conditions with an asterisk next to it. Kind of like Will said, I think fleet troopers and maybe snow troopers with flamers or other range limited options can be really good, but you have to be willing to give up 2 of your 6 activations, even though that does probably mean they'll be pretty safe, because they'll only have really maybe a half a round or a quarter of a round where they can be attacked, depending on when you have to drop them in.
I watched a tabletop simulator game in which I saw someone move a trooper unit in a direction I thought was really odd, kind of away from the battle, and it was to push that reinforcement bubble further out, so those troopers couldn't get in.
Yeah, that was really clever.
It really was. Speaking of tabletop simulator, let's talk about our social media here. Ryan and I have been streaming on Twitch. We've rather enjoyed it. We've got some tech issues to work out. Ryan's computer does not enjoy my dulcet tones sometimes, and he loses my connection there. We're working on that, but come watch us. Come see what we're doing. We're on twitch.tv/SWSTABcast. We're starting to play with the idea, and it's working well. And Ryan and I love to talk about the game because he and I don't play it all that well, apparently. But we love to talk about it, which makes all the difference in the world. So check us out on Twitch.
Hey, I have a couple medals. Thank you very much.
Also, be sure to check us out on social media networks. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at SWSTABcast. We are on iTunes, and we're working on getting Spotify. So we really appreciate it if you would leave us a good rating on iTunes, and we'll let everybody know once we get approved for Spotify.
We've also got a t-shirt shop on Teespring where you can pick up some cool swag for some STABcast shirts, as well as shirts for some of the other local Knoxville gaming groups. Any money we make there just goes to paying for our hosting costs. We'd love if you went and checked it out. I also want to plug the Legion Discord server. I've been having a lot of fun there. The Invader League is heating up. We are most of the way through the round of 16, moving into the round of 8. I think there's 2 games left to be played. And man, is this bracket heating up. The Rebels had maybe about a third, or maybe between like 30 and 40% of the league signups. And we had a bunch of groups of 5 people that played, and the top 2 advanced to a 16-player elimination bracket. And depending on how the last couple round of 16 matches swing, 4 or 5 of the top 8 lists are going to be flying the Phoenix banner for the Rebels. I'll be honest, looking at Adepticon and the Invader League and some of the other big, more organized places, I thought Imperials were going to run away with it, just because it seems to be the Imperials tend to be more popular. They tend to get played and bought a little more. If people are only buying one faction, more of them tend to be gravitating towards Imperials. But I do really enjoy how coming into the top 8 of this Invader League, which had a good number of participants, it's pretty close to balance, and that's pretty cool. I personally didn't expect to see it.
Yeah, balance is always nice to have. So this week, we've received some long-range communications, but they've been from the core. FFG has published official tournament rules.
Yay! All right, I'm the only one excited. That's cool. I'll be excited by myself.
Well, this is where Ryan and I fight over who's the organizer and who's the marshal. So, locally, I tend to be the organizer, but then Ryan wants to claim marshal duties.
Because I know all the rules. Like, it's okay, Ben. There's a couple of highlights. We're obviously not going to read all the tournament rules, but we're going to hit the highlights here. For being a little bit more competitive player than I am, one thing really stuck out to me, and that is the tiebreaker rules for matches won. We've known since the core rulebook that if you tie on objective points, it goes to points destroyed. But to see who wins and gets placements in a tournament, since games take so long, we're not always going to have a quick and even cut. We're going to have cuts where there's going to be people with the same record, the same number of wins that make it and don't. And so we're talking about those tiebreaker rules. And it's strength of schedule And then if you're tied on strength of schedule, which is going to be pretty easy to do, considering that even the big events are probably only going to be 4 rounds long, it goes to strength of schedule of your opponents, extended strength of schedule. And that's over victory points, and that's over total points destroyed. When I first read that, I didn't exactly love it. It put me off a little bit because strength of schedule is something that you as a player can't control. You can't make choices that help improve your strength of schedule. It's just whatever the TO gives you to do in the opponents you play, and it puts your fate in your opponent's hand. That can be a little bit scary, especially if you beat somebody and then they drop. They ruin your strength of schedule. And I really don't like that. But the more I got to thinking about it, I think for the time being, it's the best option that we have. If we do it on victory points, like we talked about with intercept the transmissions, if you have a perfect game of intercept the transmissions, you can get a maximum of 12 victory points. While if you have a perfect game of key positions, you get 3. And if we did it based on overall victory points, you would only ever play intercept transmissions, because whoever won, it would help catapult them ahead in tiebreaker score. You also can't do points destroyed. Well, you could, but I don't like it because it favors one type of list or one type of army building. It really favors these types of styles that just throw a bunch of dice and we'll watch each player just try to tie the game and then go into a murder game, a death match. And I think it'll really favor ATSTs. I think it'll often favor the Imperial player a little bit overall, but not too much. But it'll favor more than just one faction. It'll favor a style. And I really like that you have all kinds of different ways that you can express yourself within Legion.
Yeah, points destroyed always worries me with point fortresses. Things that are harder to kill, have a lot more hit points, and yes, they're more expensive, but they're also more likely to live longer.
Yeah. And so I think strength of schedule is not a great option, but right now it's the best option that we have. Ben, what stood out to you in these tournament rules?
You know me, I'm a painter. I like to try to mod stuff, and the mod rules I thought were interesting, but it opens a bit of a sticky wicket. Most players won't have a problem with this, but it boils down to paint and mod all you want, but you can't disguise your models as other things, and you can't dramatically alter the height of the model, either taller or shorter, because of the way we do line of sight rules and how we do range rules and those kind of things. Your bases can be the exact same. They don't have to be FFG issued, which I thought was interesting.
That surprised me a lot.
Yeah, it really did. And I get it. There are people who love the clear bases, but it has to be able to use the movement, the official movement rulers. So if it doesn't fit in that, then it doesn't count. You have to have the same base size, it says. Basically the same, I think is what the rule book says, which I thought was interesting. Basically the same and exactly the same, or it gives you enough room for some variance, but that can make the difference between I'm in base-to-base contact or I'm not in base-to-base contact. I think the biggest thing that the mod rules are about is you can't dramatically alter the things you're doing to be unreasonable. But when you talk about being unreasonable, you leave it up in the hands of your tournament organizer or your marshal. So, sure, my ATST is on tiny stubby legs and now he's only 3 inches tall. Okay, that can negatively affect line of sight. You can't see as far, but also means people can't see you because on all the boards I've watched, the ATST towers above most of the terrain. Very rarely has line of sight issues unless you are right up against a rock underneath it.
What I would say to those of you who are wanting to mod is always bring your originals with you. Just in case your TO has an issue with how you've modded or changed things, you're not down a model. Bring your originals with you. And I think most players will be cool with you using your custom stuff.
Yeah, when in doubt, check with your organizer beforehand. Take a picture of it, send it to him. Hey, listen, this event's a couple weeks out. Let me know if this is doable or not. I've had the question come up in other games, X-Wing before, and I was like, yeah, it looks cool and it's awesome, and put it on the table so people can marvel at it, but it's too different than what the actual model is, and so I can't let you put it on the table.
Right.
So, but it's definitely one of those things. It's going to be a local judgment, so it could change from tournament to tournament where you're playing at. It opens a bit of a sticky wicket. Someone's going to get their feelings hurt somewhere. This is the nature of these kind of things when you leave it that open. But I get it.
I think you're just trying to find a way to put Ewok jokes in this show.
I'm trying. Sticky wicket. Will, what did you notice in the tournament organizer rules?
What I thought was interesting was how it uses the regular deck of deployments, game types, all that sort of stuff for each round, and it's between you and your opponent to work out what the scenario is in each game, rather than what we used in our 500-point tournament, which was setting each round up and saying, all right, everyone, we're doing, breakthrough on major offensive or something like that. So I think that's why SOS makes the most sense, since there's no control over objective points. Like Ryan was mentioning, Steve might get 20 points over a tournament while someone else might only get 7 or something, just based on the missions they play. So that's why you really can't use it as your first tiebreaker.
So are you in favor? Do you wish it was more Imperial Assault style where everybody played the same mission, or this turns out to be more the Armada style where each player brings a deck of cards? Which do you prefer?
I prefer it this way. I think it opens up a lot more choices, especially with each player assembling their own deck, which I think we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, I can't wait for us to get more cards to really be able to make our decks more different and more varied.
And I was kind of hoping some of the prizes for the tournaments were going to be different objective cards, kind of like Rune Wars does for their sets. I kind of like that idea.
Right.
But I get it. It allows you a little bit more flexibility to see different things. It also gives you more control. When you talk about initiative in red and blue player, which we're about to talk about, you have more control over that rather than your organizer saying, these are the things we're playing. No, because my list doesn't do that well.
Right. I'll be anxious to see, because once again, these are just the general tournament rules. I'll be anxious to see if our quarterly kits or if we get special event kits that do come with special deployments. It'll be cool to see. This Saturday, we've got our first big event. I think it's supposed to be the recruitment kit where we play 2 350-point games, a 500-point game, and then a full 800. Since we've already done a 500-point battle at our local store, we're just going to play 4 rounds of 800 points in a day and see if we hate ourselves and each other at the end of it. So tonight we want to take a minute, and talking about turn 0, we want to talk about how to prepare for a competitive event, how to build, and what to think about when you're trying to come up with your non-casual night Legion list. Now, keeping in mind that when you go to a casual night, you might have an idea of who you're playing, and you can change your list or your army in between each rounds. We're talking about having to come a bit ready for everything, playing this for 3 or 4 games in a row without being able to alter it. So Ben, what is the first thing that you try to consider when you're trying to come up with an 800-point competitive list?
So now that we have the tournament rules, it's changed. The way you build your battle card deck is that the person with initiative who chooses to be blue or red, then you use the blue player's battle card deck. And you only have to have 4 of each card in order to build that deck up. That's a pretty amazing thing, because as we get more and more objectives and more battle plans and deployment zones and conditions, if I don't like a particular condition, if I dislike, limited visibility because I'm playing 2 ATSTs, then it's gone. And I make sure I save enough points so I can control if I'm the blue player or not. If I go crazy and do the 10-point initiative just so I can control the battle deck, I see that now. So when we talked about initiative last week, this only ups the ante on, and I really think pushes back to my point of blue player has that control. And so I can make sure that at least the missions I want, they're the objectives, the conditions, and the deployments that I at least like. And then, we could decide with the normal, a ban system. I like it. Now, when it comes to actually building for that, I still think I build an army that can be ready to encounter just as much as I can. If I can try to, to play against whatever opponent I have show up. So if it's nothing but heavy armor, if it's nothing but troopers, I try to find that balance between the things and make sure that my battle deck works for me. Ryan, what about you? When you're building that list, when you're looking at I'm playing this weekend, what do you put together?
I think you really need to find your style as a player. I talked about a little bit before how I think Legion is so cool on how you can really choose how you want to express yourself, how you want to express your strategy. Lists can look very, very different. It's not like there's 1 or 2 Rebel lists and there's 1 or 2 Imperial lists, but there's a wide breadth within them on how you want to play the game. And I think you really have to find your style. You have to find a way to hone it in and play test and grind and figure out what works and what doesn't to try to push you to play the way that you want to go. Do you want to play a trooper spam? Do you want to play lots of walkers? Because you can do that on both sides of the table. Do you want to run 1 or 2 commanders? These make huge differences on how you're going to approach the game. And it also makes huge differences, kind of like Ben was talking about, on how your battle deck is going to work, on what objectives you tend to favor, on what deployments you tend to favor. If you're running long range ATRTs or ATSTs, you want the Long March. If you want double commander and your opponent is only running single commander, you want Disarray. Figuring out how you want to play the game and finding ways to force your opponent to play your game is really, really key. If you just try to go middle of the road on everything, where you're going to take, one pretty well kitted out commander and then a little bit of everything, I don't think you'll do probably quite as well as if you really try to throw yourself to one archetype to the other. But find the way that you want to play. Do you want to rush into battle and hold a position down and wait for your opponent to come to you? Do you want to play this scrappy 2 or 3 skirmish game? Finding what's fun for you, because you're going to be doing this for 4 rounds in a row. We're going to be playing for 8, 9, or 10 hours with the same list. So you better make sure that it's something that you enjoy, and you better make sure it's something that's fun.
I know a lot of people think, oh, this game is so new that surely there's not that much list variety. And I just can't say that's true. I mean, I've played other games that were competitive, and the very first things were out, yeah, I saw the same list over and over. But I'm really not seeing that. Part of it is, how much have I bought? Well, I can't run that list. I'm going to run some other variation of it. Or I really like these things. I'm going to put that on the table. There's a lot of variation for only being 3 months into this game.
Yeah, it's kind of a classic argument of between having a list for all comers or really specializing into one thing that you think your list can use to the fullest to knock your opponent out, no matter what they're trying to do. And I think that's a really interesting discussion right now in the game. One thing I'd like to add is that when you're building your list, you need to be wary of spending points on needless upgrades. You see it a lot in X-Wing and other games like this, where you see all those open upgrade slots and you just want to fill every single one of them with all the grenades and all the scopes and all the things. But you really need to sit with each upgrade and look at it and say, what will this do for me? Do these troopers need grappling hooks? Probably not. Sorry, Ben.
Well, we all need grappling hooks and environmental gear. We got to be ready for everything, Will.
I've seen so many people put extra grenades on every one of their troopers, and then they only field 5 groups of troopers when you could pull all of those grenades off and a couple other upgrades and have a 6th group of troopers. I'm not saying don't take grenades. I'm not saying don't take extra troopers or don't take heavy weapons, but you need to make sure that you have a plan and a purpose for including that upgrade.
It seems a bit easier on the rebel side sometimes. Oh, I'll give an extra trooper and I'll use the heavy unit. But I've seen some naked trooper lists. I'm like, oh, why would they do that? And it's because it squeezed that extra activation out somewhere. And it's like gives them another turn to play another unit or move into an objective token.
2 heavy weapons on either side of the table is an extra squad of troopers. That's crazy to think about. That is absolutely crazy to think about. 2 heavy weapons on the rebel side is an ATRT. 3 heavy weapons is a group of speeder bikes or an ATRT with an extra weapon. And having an activation edge can be really, really key. So, Will, what are some things, as our Imperial player, what are some things that maybe our Imperial audience needs to focus on a little bit more than just our Rebel audience?
I think a big question for Imperial lists right now is the number of bikes you bring. Bikes can be really swingy, but if you get them in the right place at the right time, they can secure you the win. But I'm not sure how many is optimal right now. I think it's between 2 and 3. 3 is really out there, though. I haven't tried it. I'd stick with 2 right now.
Speaking of 3 bikes, Ryan and I watched a game on Sunday, and we were both excited because it had 3 sets of bikes in it. And then the dice just did not cooperate. Veers got shot at a whole bunch of times, and he just flaked off every shot. He's like, nope, not going to die today. Not going to die. I think the positioning was mostly right. I really do.
Yeah, but those bikes also took a lot of heat for the troopers. Their job was done well. They did ultimately win the game at the end of the day, though.
They did.
So let me ask you this, Will. Is 0 bikes a valid answer? Or would you always suggest to at least take 1 or 2 sets?
If you're fielding like 6 groups of troopers and double commander and can't fit that bike unit, I think that might be okay. But if you're fielding an ATST, I think 2 groups of bikes are better than an ATST.
Okay, that's fair.
Another thing I think Imperial should consider is whether to focus on short range or long range firepower. It used to be we really only had long range, but now with snowtroopers, you can really focus into, those range 1 attacks or range 1 to 2. and maybe running Vader with snowtroopers trying to get the rebels in close and throw your lightsaber and flame them and all sorts of stuff like that. Or you could go for Veers and a lot of DLTs and missile launchers and an ATST and try to sit back for the first couple rounds, dealing damage while the rebels have to approach you. So that's the real, I think, two sides of the Imperial list building right now, is a short range build or a long range. Or you can go in the middle. That's what I'm trying tomorrow on casual night. I'm bringing double commander, snowtroopers, and regular troopers to try to have 2 groups.
Okay, cool.
So we'll see how that goes.
When building a rebel list, a couple things that I think you really need to consider. As a rebel player, you really need to focus on your command bubbles. Where is that bubble going to be? Because you don't have that Darth Vader unlimited suppression. You really need to keep an eye on where your bravery is going to be, where your orders are going out of, and where it's going to be easier for you to remove suppression from or take suppression. The other thing where I think rebels are really strong right now is I think Imperial command cards are better all the time. But when you can get that specific situation where the rebel command cards really pop off, I think they're hands down far and away better. And so when you're building your command deck, you really need to try to sit down and think of situations of when those command cards are going to be useful. And does this army set up plays that you've kind of thought of ahead of time, like trying to force situations where you know your command cards are going to be really great? Because Son of Skywalker isn't always amazing. You know, if Luke just dies at long range of turn 2, it's not that great. But if you can get a Vader with 2 or 3 damage on him and then get a double move charge into Son of Skywalker, it can be really, really devastating. And I think Leia is even more so situational with her command cards, where they can kind of be okay, but if you can set them up right, and if your army is really built around synergizing with her big command cards, you can definitely do a whole lot of damage and take your army to the next level. The other thing you have to consider is I've noticed with Imperials, like you're bringing stormtroopers, you're taking DLTs, you're bringing snowtroopers. If you're bringing a heavy weapon at all, you're bringing the flamer. Knowing your heavy weapons as a rebel player and when each one is supposed to be used and when to bring each, I think is incredibly crucial. I think they offer a lot more diversity, a lot more variety, and they fill very different roles. So knowing when I need to bring an Ion Trooper versus when I need to bring a Z6, when I need to bring the shotgun fleet trooper over the grenade fleet trooper, knowing when to use those and kind of pairing that with the previous point of knowing how to set these heavy weapons up to fully utilize your command cards, I think is crucial. So have a plan. The other thing you have to consider is having a plan for an ATST and a Vader. And for my money, there are 2 ways to approach ATSTs and Vaders, and you kind of approach them the same way, but with different heavy weapons. You either assault them and you try to go all out, and within 3 or 4 turns, you try to just neuter them down and make them next to worthless, if not outright kill them. Or you just ignore them. I typically assault Vader and ignore ATSTs, but 2 of the tabletop simulator games I got to watch this weekend and cast, they just both ignored Vader. They won because they just said, you know what, I'm going to use force push. I'm going to just use some extra move actions or throwing bodies in Vader's way of units that are almost dead or that are not in the right position, and just slowing him down to make his 6 turns as least effective as they can be. Ignoring Vader also works. Those are some things that I think as a rebel player you really, really need to consider.
So do you recommend double commander for rebels?
I am having a lot of fun with double commander right now. I think it'll become a mainstay, but I don't think it's your only option. Not going double commander lets you bring essentially an extra ATRT or an extra set of troopers, fully upgraded. So I think double commander is really strong right now because having 6 unique command cards is quite powerful. But I can see plays made for others. Just getting 6 troopers Leia and 2 or 3 ATRTs could be really powerful as well, and just not having Luke. But I think it depends. It goes back up to finding the style that you want to play. For me, my style is double commander. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
So, Will, I got to ask you, double commander, I know you're trying it tomorrow night, but what's your feelings on that for the Imperial side?
I've used it before by necessity when I didn't have enough models painted. But it's interesting. A lot of the times it ends up with using Vader to try to distract your opponent, which Ryan just told you all how to avoid falling into that trap by ignoring him. But I've had games where Vader runs up and takes all the shots from the rebels for the first couple rounds and dies, but then you have Veers in the back like, all right, well, now I'm in charge. And he can do his buff support role while the rebels have sacrificed activations to kill Vader while you were setting up or maybe taking shots at them in response. So I think it works, but you do lose out on activations compared to the rebels.
Yeah, ignoring Vader was a strategy. I mean, I thought about it. I've done it a couple times, but these games over this past weekend I watched, I was real impressed with the way that they were able to not manipulate Vader, but in order to throw bodies in the way, slow him down, make him as less synergistic as possible. I was quite impressed with both players on that. Speaking of Vader, let's slide our way into Imperial Corner. Will, what's going on in Imperial Town?
Well, we're getting ready to besiege Hoth with our snowtroopers. They released a couple weeks ago, and I've really enjoyed them. I know it seems like they'd be slow, but as we briefly discussed, the double move with Speed 1 is actually further than a Speed 2 single move, so I think you're getting more economy out of them compared to normal troopers. As far as special weapons, I'm really liking Flamers compared to Ion. Ion's just too short range for my liking. Well, I say that in comparison to Flamer, but for what it does, I think it would need to be 1 to 3 to be valuable to stop the ATRT rush. If they're at 1 to 2 and you haven't dealt with them yet, they're probably going to be a problem anyway. So I would deal with them with DLTs at long range, and then use the Flamers against the Rebel Troopers who really have trouble surviving against it, even though it's not as effective as the 2 black dice version mounted on ATRTs. It still manages to wipe out squads every now and then.
Kind of on that note, just out of curiosity, how much is a snowtrooper squad with a flamer? I don't know off the top of my head.
68 points.
I mean, that's kind of interesting. Would you prefer that or the 75-point flamer ATRT?
I like that it's a trooper squad because it still scores a lot of objectives and does what troopers do.
That's fair. Yeah, that's totally valid.
I would say that the crit that you get with an ATRT sometimes means you can't use that unit. But then again, if you only have 5 hit points based on the snowtroopers, you're dead at that point anyway, so...
But the snowtroopers get their red defense die.
They do.
One thing that has been pointed out is that the snowtrooper squad with a flamer costs the exact same as the stormtrooper squad with DLT. So I think that's an interesting thing for list building where if you need to swap them out, they're the same point cost before any other upgrades, so...
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Break down the Ion Snowtrooper versus the Ion Missile Launcher guy. I don't know that I think the Ion Snowtrooper is any better.
Yeah, I think the missile launcher is just better at the anti-vehicle role. The Ion Trooper for Snowtroopers is black, white, white, which really doesn't sound like a reliable die pool. So I think I would stick with a couple long-range support missile launchers.
One thing that you have to consider, though, is you guys surge on attack, which means I think it's actually a better die pool than Rebels Double Red that doesn't surge on attack. And you also have that Veers command card that lets people ready. And if you can pop out 4 Ion tokens over the course of 2 rounds without having to waste that action, I think Veers synergy could make it worth it.
Well, I think Veers just makes the missile launcher better with that as well.
That's true.
I mean, it doesn't have the cumbersome. The Snowtrooper doesn't. So you get to move and shoot, which is what they like to do. And if Veers is readying it, then you get to, move, shoot, or move target, then do that. Or move, dodge, and then shoot, because your refreshes come from someplace else. Also gives you the option to refresh.
Let me ask this question, Will. Have you had to play a mirror match against Imperial versus Imperial against an ATST yet? Because you've talked a lot about countering ATRTs, that you can one-shot off the board, but when you have something that you can't, does that make the Ion more valuable? If that's maybe something you haven't had to experience yet.
I've played once, but the ATST wasn't much of a factor. It was secure the supplies, so my troopers just ran out and grabbed crates and then ran back, so didn't have to engage with it much. Yeah, I think Ion could be more valuable in that scenario, but at the same time, could adopt the Rebel strategy of ignore the thing.
Yep, it's a pretty good strategy.
I think the Ion discussion would be a fair argument if it was 1 to 3, like the Rebels get. If the whole squad's 1 to 3 and you can engage those vehicles at 1 to 3 with the ion, I think it would be worth it for me. But the 1 to 2 just seems a bit odd. As you've mentioned a lot, range 2 and range 3 are very different.
They're very different animals.
I would say if you're bringing flamers, consider grenades, because once you're at range 1, if you get to throw your flamer die pool and then 4 more black dice as well, you're going to be dishing out a lot of pain. So I'd recommend to do that, but don't bring concussion grenades, because if you're rolling it all as one pool, you're already getting ignores cover from the flamer.
Yep.
So bring the impact grenades in case later on you have to throw them at a vehicle.
Also, Will, with you advocating this strategy, does that mean that this episode is sponsored by the FFG Dice Pack?
Why, yes, it is. Go out and get your extra dice today. And from a hobby standpoint, I really love the Snowtrooper models. They're really nice.
I was priming mine 3 days ago. They really are. They're fantastic models. Like, I was just kind of dry fitting and seeing where this goes, and they're great looking models. I will say that I was painting tonight. I'm trying to get my Imperial Army before our event this Saturday. And I do like the Snowtroopers better than my Stormtroopers. I don't kind of like the way the guns are molded into the hands a little bit. Everyone's double-handed, their guns on the regular Stormtroopers. So it's harder to paint. I don't know the detail comes out quite as nice, but you saw everything on those Snowtroopers. Well, if we're attacking Hoth, we probably need to go inside of our Rebel dirty ice caves and see what's going on in there. So, Ryan, what's going on in Rebel Town today?
Veers brings the maximum firepower, but Fleet Troopers bring the maximum dice. These guys are so nifty. The more experience I get with them, the more I get to fiddle around with them, the more I absolutely love them. I don't think they're going to replace Rebel Troopers. I still think you're going to take 2 or 3 squads of Rebel Troopers, but Fleet Troopers fill a nice little specialist role. If you can come to terms with the main idea that they bring, and that is variance, they have probably the highest variance in the game. Getting to throw, with a fully loaded die pool, they can bring 13 dice in one throw if they bring their grenade launcher. Granted, most of them are white dice, but they do surge on both attack and defense. But you have to be ready for these big attacks that are going to roll absolute hot, steaming garbage, and other dice pools that are just going to wipe entire units off the field. Nothing is more satisfying than getting to roll a big die pool. And I got to do this to my buddy Brett at his Leia, and then she just disappeared.
We've talked about this with a Z6 Trooper. Sometimes those 6 white dice, all blank. But then sometimes they're all crits.
Yeah, but now you can do it with 12.
And
once again, this episode sponsored by the FFG Dice Pack.
And more dice is better, I'm told.
I don't know if it's better. It's definitely more fun. Getting that surge means they hit on a 3 and 8, which is pretty rad. They've got high variance. They are range limited, which is probably their biggest downfall. But it's okay because you want these guys to tuck in at your objectives anyway. And once they kind of get where they're going, they just kind of hold down positions. If you're bringing a heavy Fleet Trooper list, you're probably going to favor objectives like intercept the transmissions or key positions over things like recover the supplies or breakthrough. If you can find a way to make their range restriction work for you, they can do a lot of damage. The one thing I do feel when I play with Fleet Troopers is I would give my kingdom for the nimble keyword. Having been used to using it all the time with my Rebel Troopers, when I only get to spend my dodge token once and I can't always get it back, it can be really, really tough. And I'm not always sure when I need to use it. Do I use it on this defense? Do I use it on this other one that's coming that's going to maybe have some more dice? I would love to see the nimble keyword on them, but we've got to make them, balanced in some way, shape, or form. The other thing I think they bring is 2 really interesting heavy weapon options. They've got their scattergun, which is 2 red dice, Pierce 1 for just 23 points. That is so cheap. So the fact that your dice pool is going to be, if you have the extra body, which you probably do, it's 10 white dice, 2 red dice with Pierce 1. That is absolutely insane. Pierce, so far, I think these are the first models that have it that aren't commanders. And so getting Pierce readily available shreds stormtroopers. And it means that the white defense die that rebels are going to throw in Rebel on Rebel hardly matters at all. But there's something really, really clutch about their second option, which is the grenade launcher, which seems way more expensive because it throws worse dice than the scattergun at 2 whites and 1 black. It costs 10 more points, has impact 2, which is pretty cool. The rebels finally have a source of impact on an infantry unit that's not just impact 1, but it has the blast keyword. Now, in this die pool, is the blast keyword worth 10 extra points over 2 red dice? I kind of think it is. You do have to reload it, but if you're playing these objectives that I think fleet troopers are really good at, where they get to stand still, they don't prioritize dodge tokens because they don't have nimble. They don't prioritize aim tokens because they can only reroll 2 dice, and you're rolling crappy dice at, bunches and bunches of white dice. So you get to influence with an aim token a very small percent of your pool. I don't think the refresh action is a bad action on them. And it gets this grenade back up and running because it means that cover doesn't matter for all of your attacks. So if you roll these 13 dice and get 5 hits, but they are in heavy cover, that's only 3 saves that they have to make. But if you can make them just for a keyword, make them roll all 5 saves and getting an extra hit or 2, that's huge. That is absolutely huge. I'll give up my action for that every day.
That is a huge difference, yeah.
Plus, it removes suppression tokens.
Yeah, refreshing does get rid of your suppression tokens.
I think we have to talk about the thing you didn't mention, standby. Like, standby is a thing they like to do with this model. And do you find yourself doing it more? We had this conversation 2 or 3 episodes ago about, hadn't quite figured out what to use standby with.
The more I try to use standby, and yeah, they do have that keyword that lets them, take a standby and get an aim token. Once again, I don't think aim tokens are all that great on them. And I don't think the standby action is all that strong of an action. It's only really strong late in the round if a commander maybe hasn't moved yet. Because if they take a suppression token, you lose the action. And since they're getting outranged by just about everybody, people can just shoot at them. If I'm trying to stand by to hold a position from Will's stormtroopers coming in, where he would probably, in a different situation, move and then shoot, all he's going to do this time around is shoot and then move. And he's gotten rid of my standby token. So I don't think standby is particularly strong. Maybe something will come in a later phase where we'll get an upgrade that will make standby tokens better. Maybe getting to do more things with them other than just move or attack. Right now, I think it's almost a blank space on the card.
Thinking back to your grenade launcher, seems like an anti-T-47 weapon. Blast gets rid of that cover. Impact 2 to get some things through that armor.
Yeah. I think almost everything in the game is an anti-T-47 weapon, but this is a little bit better than most, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect transition to our unaligned systems. So I put the T-47 on the table a couple weeks ago. I hated it. I did not enjoy it. I did not like the things I thought it was going to do. It just died. And now, granted, if I had moved it slightly differently, if I had taken the extra move rather than trying to shoot, it would have survived a little bit longer. Perhaps I would have done more with it. But for the point cost, for 175 points, there's so much more I can do in a Rebel list other than that T-47 Snowspeeder.
It's too expensive, and that's, I think, the end of the discussion on the T-47. Is it's cool, it's neat, it looks great, it's too expensive.
Just too expensive. So seriously, though, let's now, since I've told you I hate this, let's actually talk about something that both sides can see here. Let's talk about some force powers. Vader gets 3 force slots, Luke gets 2. As you take a look at really what the rub is, I mean, there's some things that, they can only take themselves, the faction-specific stuff. I think for Saber Throw, it's an auto-include on Vader. Vader wants to use it. It's the only way he's going to get within range to kill things quick enough, or at least kill things until he can get into melee to then destroy everything. I don't think you ever take it on Luke. His own weapon is already pretty good for that, and it doesn't take up that force slot that you don't get, that Vader has an extra one for. I just can't see it on Luke.
For Luke, if you have unlimited force upgrade slots, I could see it as an anti-vehicle option. But since Luke only gets 2 force powers, there's 2 better force powers to take on Luke.
We've often talked about how Luke wants to get into melee range of something, and maybe the T-47 is the anti-Luke. just because it's flying around and can't be touched by a melee weapon. But Saber Throw, I just can't see it. There's times I'm like, man, if Luke had that, but it would be only good in this one situation at this one moment because the Earth was tilted in a slight way and the sun came through the window. Force reflexes and force push, I think this is the real rub that you see. For me personally, I think force reflex is a little bit more powerful in the way that I see it. With Vader's ability to ready a single force every turn, it's basically it's a free dodge token. You have to activate Vader and Luke very early in order to make sure you get to use that dodge token. But the moment you put a single dodge on Vader or Luke, people are like, I don't want to shoot him anymore. They're very much afraid of that deflect. And then it allows them to, to rush in, relentless and charge, get them, they can spend an action refreshing, move and get an attack. And so force reflexes is 5 points more expensive. Force push is only 10, but I just see it with everything that I like. I like force reflexes. Luke, you could theoretically not use it if you didn't want to. Luke's command cards tend to give him options to get dodge tokens. One explicitly gives it to him, and the other one he could choose himself to take the dodge token. So 2 out of those 3 will give him a dodge token. But Lord, if you put 2 on him, you're less likely to want to shoot him. I've not put battle meditation on Luke or Vader. It seems great, a giant comm unit for a giant comm range for a single unit. You can basically issue a command to anyone on the board. But is it worth the opportunity cost of the slot? Luke only has 2. Vader gets that extra one, so I can maybe tie that up there. Makes me wonder about, is it worth it for Luke? Now, it will supersede command cards. So like Luke's My Ally is the Force, it allow him to activate something other than a trooper. Because it does say, a figure on the board. So you could activate maybe your ATRT who's off in the field by himself, or your T-47 if you haven't put it back in the box after our previous conversation. You could, but with Luke, again, you only have those 2 slots. And Vader, I think, does pretty well without it. So when we look at our faction-specific ones, it's Choke and Jedi Mind Trick, and they're both super flavorful. They feel exactly what those 2 characters would do. Vader just walks around just choking people. Like, I don't like that guy, kill it. It's very much an anti-heavy weapon. It's like, nope, get rid of that DLT. Nope, get rid of that Z6. Nope, that flamer guy, I see him walking towards me, kill it. You do have to be at range 1, though. It's a very close range kind of weapon. If you're going to move first, though, because you want to do that because of force reflexes, it works really well. Mind Trick, I just love on Luke. I like being able to play with suppression. Limiting someone's ability to get actions because you threw suppression at them, they weren't expecting it, has done me lots of favors in lots of games. I just absolutely love it. So for me, my ideal setup is Vader, Saber Throw, Force Reflex, and Choke if you got the points. If you can spend it, I would. It's only 5 points. It works really well, gives Vader lots of options. I think Luke is Force Reflex and Mind Tricks. I just can't see it anywhere else. And I know what you guys are thinking, but you didn't talk about push. And I've seen it used well. I just had the point, cost, and value. So I'm going to open it up to you guys. Will, what do you think about push?
I think push, like you said, is very situational, but I have started having an idea in my head where it would be really, really nice. And that's using Vader to wombo combo a rebel unit into the awaiting jaws of your flamer troopers. And I think that could be a nice setup if you can pull it off. Otherwise, it does help Vader because he's so slow. Just say, hey, I'm moving to you and you're also coming over here so we can meet in the middle and I'll slaughter you with my light stick. So I think it can work, but only in a few situations that you could probably get around if you had Choke instead. I really think it's dependent on points. That's how I look at it. If I have 10 points and everything else is where I want it to be, I'll take push. If I only have 5, I'll take Choke. If I don't have either, I don't take either.
For Luke, I think it comes down to one big thing. Mind Trick is awesome. I love it. I think it fits my playstyle a little bit better. But I see where push is good. I can see how it can alter and change the battlefield and really upset your opponent's plans. Even just pushing people out of cover so your next troopers to activate can light them up. But I think ultimately, push really gets its value depending on the objectives that we're playing with. And right now, it's not such a huge deal since everyone's battle deck is going to be the same. But once we start to get more and more battle cards, and you can really start tailoring your deck to certain things, I think Force Push is amazing on the supply box objective. I think it's really great on key positions. Anything that requires you to be within base-to-base contact, if you can force push somebody and then use a trooper unit or maybe even mind trick if you're crazy and not taking force reflexes on Luke and suppress them down to keep them off objective points. I think if you build a battle deck that is really keyed towards that, it can be really, really cool. But I think it really, for the Rebels, comes down to what the objectives are at play and how you can directly impact that with push.
One of the games we watched this weekend was Luke and Vader both force pushing each other's units around. The Luke player was trying to dodge Vader, like didn't want to engage with him. So he would just push Vader away, and then he would run away at Luke speed. It was interesting to watch. My next real question is, so these are the Force powers. So anything new is going to have to probably come from a Force user. FFG likes to do these things thematically. So where are we getting our new Force powers, if we get new Force powers at some point?
I think for the Empire, we're looking at Inquisitor expansions, either the Grand Inquisitor or maybe the other minor ones in a pack together. And all I'm going to say is that I'm really excited for my helicopter lightsabers.
Oh, Lord, no, please no.
Womp, 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 womp.
I think for the Rebels, with the way that Star Wars media has gone, it's only a matter of time before we get Star Wars Rebels stuff in Legion. And I think when we get a Kanan Ezra pack, we'll get a couple new cool Force powers. I think that's where we'll get them. I would love to see like a card that like lets you see the future, like a Yoda style card, or I guess Kanan kind of does the same thing as well. Or maybe like once per game, you can make your opponent play their command card face up or something of that nature. That'd be really cool. But we'll see a Star Wars Rebels upgrade pack and we'll get some Force powers there.
I mean, I was hoping to see it from some kind of Ewok Jedi like Wicked or some kind of Dark Sith Jar Jar, but...
Go back to Star Trek, Ben. They make such great tabletop games.
Oof.
Oh, so sad. I can see it coming from like an Asajj Ventress operative pack, kind of the same style as Boba. I can see that definitely coming into play, getting some extra Force powers, and it'd be one of those, ooh, I kind of like what she does with that. I could use that on my Luke. Or, ooh, I like what she has. And it'd probably be some kind of dark side only. And so Vader could definitely use it.
The other place we could find some new Force powers is we're going to put on our tinfoil hats. And there are some numbers that are missing in the Star Wars Legion product page. Like the numbers for product numbers kind of jump around. And I would love to see alternate sculpt Luke and Vaders that come with new Force powers and new command cards. That would be really sick if one of those missing numbers was that. That'd be so rad.
One day when we expand out, maybe get additional armies, we may see some more Force powers come with the Jedi generals. Love to see an Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, or Rey or the First Order and Kylo. Yeah, but I think for Force powers wise, we've got a really good start. But I think that is all we've got time for. So guys, thanks for tuning in. Hope you're enjoying the show. Send us some questions. Send us some feedback. We'd love to hear it at swstabcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, guys. Special thanks to our producer, John Michael. And until next time, I'm Ryan Slawowski, reminding you to always aim and flame.
I'm Will Heim. I too have the flame.
And I'm Ben Fowler. Sweet God, I just keep painting. Why did I want two armies?
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. It was a fresh ad-libbed hot take.
You're bringing the flavor.